So you're saying that this natural resource, meaning finite, gonna run out, is being predominantly used in materials or in items that we could argue is not a necessity, right? And that was like, wait, what? We're okay with this? We are okay with this. And I also knew that really like these, from taking chemistry and just knowing my basic understanding of like these elements, they're little like literal elements that are going into everything else that are powering like things. um I also knew that like, wait, how are we going to support innovation if it's the jewelry industry that's taking up so much of these raw materials that's needed to support that?
Hmm.
And when I was doing like my research on it, I'm like, nobody is talking about this. It's about like the technology industry that's like, oh, well, we can look into e-waste. Great. It's great. Like we can all solve different problems. But again, that's still a very siloed point of view, right? It's circular in terms of your own industry. But I think the true solve would be like if we all looked at it cohesively within the supply chain on who's using it. And I think that was a huge gap.
In today's episode, we speak with Cleo Escarez, the founder of Redyoos, a company focused on supporting the clean energy transition through recycling jewelry and precious metals. Redyoos supports the circular economy by reducing the need for mining new finite precious metals and provides an end-of-life solution for consumers and businesses to properly discard their pieces. Now let's take a step back. What's the problem here? Well, precious metals like silver and gold are critical for green technology like solar panels, batteries, medical devices, even. Yet an estimated $61 billion of precious metals gets landfilled every year. 30 to 50% of virgin silver and gold production are directed towards jewelry every year. And this is during a time when there's an increased demand for these critical technologies. And it's also getting harder and harder to mine these materials out in nature. So what's the solution? Well, precious metals are infinitely recyclable and without any loss of quality, offering a viable path to a more stable supply chain. Redyoos connects the end of life from one industry into renewed inputs for critical green technology through recycling. Now, this conversation dives into our pursuit of real impact, finding blue ocean's opportunities in combining unlikely industries, and the power of those cross-industry partnerships. People don't usually put jewelry and green technology in the same conversation, but Cleo provides that link and finds solutions for one with the waste of another. Enjoy. Cleo, I appreciate your time and thank you so much for speaking with us. For our audience, I'd love to just jump right in and get a little backstory on who you are and how you got into the jewelry world.
Well, thanks for having me. Who am I? Well, my name is Cleo. I am from Seattle. I'm a founder of Redyoos. We are an urban mine, so we recycle precious metals from jewelry. Um, and beyond that, I'm a mother of three, and I identify as a recovering corporate executive, now new founder. So that's who I am in a quick runabout. So my whole career has been essentially in fashion and accessories, various roles, various responsibilities. But immediately prior to Reduce, I was running a jewelry company. We were B Corp certified, and we're probably one of the most ethically sourced jewelry company in the world. But that still wasn't enough in my sustainability journey. I really was craving a little bit more than actually selling jewelry. So
Mm. When you say ethically sourced, was it using recycled metals or was it using the certified metals? What does sustainable jewelry even mean?
very good question. Are you familiar with B Corp certification? Yep. So really quick, what it is basically um, one of the things that you need to be able to check off the boxes is prioritizing people, profit, and planet. So unless you can really do that with your for-profit business, it's quite difficult to get that.
Mm,
And when I say ethically sourced, we did use recycled materials, but we also were a vertical company, meaning we owned our own manufacturing facilities. So um, if you're unfamiliar with the supply chain in fashion, it's mostly sourced out, meaning you have a factory that you contract with, which leads to a big lack of transparency in how they manage their factories or manufacturing facilities. And the fact that we were able to own that, we were able to really ensure that we're protecting um, the artisans that we were working with too.
mm. Where was the supply chain? Was it US based or was it abroad?
Bangkok in Thailand.
Oh, cool. Nice. I'm wearing a piece actually right now that I made in Thailand. Yeah, they have
Yeah,
silver. Yeah, we'll talk about this. We'll talk about that
silver.
later.
Yeah, silver is a pretty big, or silver jewelry is actually really big industry in
Yeah.
Thailand.
So you mentioned something earlier that I want to double down on. Recovering corporate executive. Yeah. What does that mean in your eyes? What is that? What's that about?
Oh, so many to unpack there. I think, my whole career has been in corporate, which means there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of politics in terms of like, um, climbing that ladder, and so much pressure. Um, and in so many ways, I feel like my world was just built around, I can only excel within the corporate world. Like that
Mm,
was kind of the mindset that I had, but it took a while for me to kind of untangle that and be like, no, actually you have great skills. You you can actually make an impact that doesn't directly tie to shareholder values.
mm-hmm,
So
mm,
that's what I mean by that. And
yeah.
and I think anybody that has worked in the corporate world, and has had those as top priorities would definitely like relate to that kind of line.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and I think the corporate world has its pros and cons just from the perspective of being an employee, but I think it leaves a lot to yearn for on a personal level at times, especially when you recognize the um, net negative that a lot of the corporations have on our planet, and sometimes they don't always align with our values. So, to that point, I mean, have you always wanted to be a founder? Was there that struggle between being in corporate world and wanting to start your own thing?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I would say yes. I am a first generation immigrant. I think that's just in our blood. To kind of just do our own thing. Or actually, no. I mean, I think there's the whole like entrepreneurship journey, and then there's the whole like really excelling in whatever pathway you choose, right? I feel like those are very common second generation pathways or first
Totally.
generation pathways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so when it comes to entrepreneurship, I would say that I've always been entrepreneur curious. Um, but I've never had the like, I guess the guts to like do it on my own, or had the confidence. Um, but I really there was a moment where I was just like, you know what? I have I just have to trust my experience at this point.
Mm,
Um, I have had the opportunity to excel and reach levels within the industry that people like me that look like me don't get to. So what else am I looking for? And so that was really like the big push
mm,
for me. I was like, you know what? It's time for you to just bet on your own, and trust that you have what it takes. What I really was trusting is really my experience, right? Like I really felt like I was uniquely positioned with my experience, being intimately familiar with the supply chain and the industry, um, and that I have kind of learned enough along the ways to be this person that have identified this big problem and has the experience to really provide the solution.
Was there a specific skill set that, besides sort of domain knowledge and capabilities to organize, manage, etc., was is there a specific skill set that you brought to the table as a founder, right? Whether it be sales, whether it be operations, whether it be any and all.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say would be like from my corporate life, there's this, you know, I think I excelled in structured thinking. Um, I learned really how to break down big, messy problems into smaller, solvable pieces. And I think that that skill has really um, helped me not only find my way through this really um, vague entrepreneurship journey, um, but it also has like given me the confidence that like yeah you can build something from scratch if you know how to really like figure out your way into solving these problems.
Hmm. Hmm. Claire, before we go jump down too much into the personal journey, I like to take a step back and just think about Reduce as a business. You're in the jewelry space, you're running this brand, but you recognize, and it's, as you say, B Corp certified, it has ethical supply chain, but you wanted more and you wanted to have a bigger impact. So where did the idea of Reduce come from? How did this idea of like take back recycling program start?
Yeah. um it was actually a culmination of a lot of things within my experience, right? So
Hmm.
going back to being intimately familiar with the industry and the space and domain knowledge, right? I mean, I literally was in our factory floors seeing the raw materials that's being used, who we're sourcing it from, how we're using it. Um, and so just knowing that, right? Like, okay, silver, like it's shared across other industries. Um, but then the other factor to it is like, you know, I knew that these materials are being shared elsewhere, including technology, right? And I just felt that the jewelry industry and the technology industry just don't really communicate very much at all. um, but yet we share such an important commodity across both of our products. And I just saw this huge gap. Um, and then the kind of environmentalist in me was like, whoa, 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 like this is a huge problem. These are finite resources. We all need to be talking about this and figuring out how we're using it, how to make sure we have enough to use it in the future. And it just like it wasn't happening. And I was like, okay, no one else is doing it. So here we are.
Yeah. As someone who's also in the sustainability space, who goes to a lot of the similar events, you seldom hear that connection between jewelry specifically and technology, for example. Were you having conversations with your suppliers, and they were also having conversations with tech companies or manufacturers as well, or is that supply chain quite separate and from the raw material uh, suppliers?
Yeah, it depends how far back you go, right? Like the simple answer is it's all connected, right? So one of the thing is I talk to customers or I talk to an MBA group and they were so like someone came up to me and said, "Wow, thank you for just educating me. I had no idea that my jewelry came from the earth." right? Like that is how far removed we are from our
Yeah.
supply chain. These
Yeah.
are MBA students, okay?
Mm,
Um, so it's all connected because it's coming literally from the same natural resources, right? It's the same as like water, for example, right? Like any industry is literally dealing with water.
mhm,
Um, but as you get further down along the supply chain, it gets so disjointed. And then that's where like everyone is kind of doing their own thing and don't think about the usage or the feedstock of where their
mhm.
products coming.
I think it's really interesting how, we equate this is a bit of a tangent, but, we equate developed economies with the amount of tertiary sector service like businesses that are involved, all these service sector stuff, professional services, etc. And all of those industries and jobs and companies and all that stuff are so far removed from like physical raw manufacturing. The HQ in New York City has the average employee there does not know what it's like to be in a factory where it's taking rock and making something out of it, right? Diluting it into the different parts of the rocks and different materials. I mean, some people know this, but the actual to internalize that at a deeper level is very um, is not always there, and I think there's something to that.
Right. No, I completely agree. And it's not really just like I'm not blaming the consumers either, right?
No,
Like I
yeah,
think that industries have taken such a huge part in this,
mm,
and including my previous world of the jewelry industry, we have done such a great job of branding and marketing and making the whole industry so opaque that the general consumer is not going to be like, where did this come from? I'm told that I'm supposed to have an engagement ring that is supposed to last me forever and 4 times my partner's salary. Like it's all this like marketing
yeah.
thing that
Manufactured desire, yeah, absolutely. I think I correlate this with food and primarily
100%.
meat and poultry. People think of chicken, they just think of this as like this pink thing that they buy in a plastic saran wrap box. But if you were to actually go to a slaughterhouse, I think a lot of people would look at their plate differently and feel differently about buying it and whatnot. And people again are just so removed from the source and from the actual supply of our materials around us, right? At the end of the day, when we talk, this conversation, I hope we get into the larger discussion of recycling and take back and all that stuff. But like, we live in a material world, and the average consumer, specifically in a developed, cushiony economy, they're not engaged, and they don't see that. And again, I'm not putting blame on them, but there's a larger picture. This is where we're at. This is the result of the economy that we have.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I guarantee you that like a 5-year-old would not be able to make the connection between like a chicken nugget and an actual chicken at this point.
Absolutely. They have to learn that it's connected somehow. Yeah. So, Cleo, though, going back to the ideation behind Reduce, you're seeing that the supply chain is correlated. You're seeing that these two things are connected, but they're not talking to each other. And you also know there's some crazy statistics around the amount of these precious metals going towards jewelry and then entering that whole supply chain where an end of life is very limited versus the utility of certain technology pieces. Can you speak to how that idea starts to merge together?
Yeah, so one of my biggest aha moment was really like speaking to one of my suppliers and like just figuring out how much of their materials is going through different industries. And one of the main ones is really like the jewelry industry, the technology industry, and technology is like everything. Like it's such a huge bucket, right? Um, and then the other would be investments, right? So think like gold coins, like bricks and things like that. Um, and that's really the main players. But when it comes to primarily silver and gold, the jewelry industry takes up to 40 to 50% of our global supply. Um, Larger in the silver world. And that was just like, excuse me? Wait, what? That so you're saying that this natural resource, meaning finite, gonna run out, is being predominantly used in materials or in items that we could argue is not a necessity, right? And that was like, wait, what? We're okay with this? We are okay with this. And I also knew that really like these, from taking chemistry and just knowing my basic understanding of like these elements, they're little like literal elements that are going into everything else that are powering like things. um I also knew that like, wait, how are we going to support innovation if it's the jewelry industry that's taking up so much of these raw materials that's needed to support that?
Hmm.
And when I was doing like my research on it, I'm like, nobody is talking about this. It's about like the technology industry that's like, oh, well, we can look into e-waste. Great. It's great. Like we can all solve different problems. But again, that's still a very siloed point of view, right? It's circular in terms of your own industry. But I think the true solve would be like if we all looked at it cohesively within the supply chain on who's using it. And I think that was a huge gap.
So you identified this gap, and you have this experience in producing and distributing jewelry. What were the next steps to creating Reduce? What were some of the key partners and stakeholders that you had to engage to create this system that was what enabled that addressed this end of life of jewelry and was able to convert it to a new useful life?
It's a very good question. So this goes back to the whole like unlearning being a recover like corporate executive. I felt like I had to really unlearn risk aversion here. So, in the corporate world, I think corporations reward caution. But the other side of being a founder, we thrive on like embracing this like uncertainty and like taking bold bets.
Hmm.
Um, those are totally different like mindsets, right? So I say that when I'm answering this question because it was like a very slow burn for me. So I was running the jewelry company, ran it for about 5 years, and then I was like, I told my husband, you know what, I'm gonna take a sabbatical. I'm so burnt out. I did it through COVID, and it was just like it just took so much out of me and I just needed time and space. So I took a sabbatical, and about 3 months in, I told my husband, like, no, actually, I'm gonna start a company. And he goes, you're crazy. But okay, not surprising. And then as I was like doing a lot of this discovery, I was like, okay, I am so risk averse that I think I need more validation. So I went into an accelerator program. Um, an
With
accelerator
this
program.
idea, with the specific idea of Reduce.
Yes. Because I was like, no, I need more validation. I can't just go out there and build this.
Hmm.
Even though I have ran like millions and millions of dollars of a P&L and like have managed things, I still was like, nope, I need to validate. Um, and trust me, I had colleagues that were like, why are you doing that? Like, just do it, right? But I'm like, no, I need validation. So I go in through this like accelerator program, and it was an I-Corp accelerator program, which is funded by the NSF, so the National Science Federation. So very heavy on the science because I wanted something to really lean on that was concrete.
Hmm.
In this program, the thing that they really focus on is customer discovery. So, meaning like I'm literally doing like customer interviews with like, a customer that just wants to recycle jewelry, don't want to recycle jewelry, or even businesses that might be open to it. And you have to do so many of them in such like a short period of time. So that was really my whole like, oh my gosh, one, this is such like an education opportunity, right? People don't know where their supply chain's coming from. And two, people are not connecting these industries. So I could have just stopped there. I could have just been like, I'm just going to be the educator, the thought leader of connecting these two. But I was like, no, we need to build this. So that's really what's just like, okay, it's really about educating our community and um, educating them about the potential of impact if industries just spoke with each other and
Hmm.
supported each other. And then building a channel and a mechanism to really link those things, which is what we're doing.
Hmm. I love that. I love it. There's so much to go off there. Claire, you mentioned the desire for validation, and again, coming from a business background where you deal with so much, how is that personally having to make that jump? You said you mentioned this to people and they had questions about it. Was it hard for you to make those first posts on LinkedIn, or have those conversations with your colleagues about this new venture you wanted to start? Tell me about that emotional transition between during this time.
Well, I think that was probably one of the hardest part,
Yeah.
like I think, um, when I had people saying like, well, you don't need validation, like this is a great idea, you should just go do it. Um, I think being in the corporate world, there is a lot of pressure in perfectionism. I think that there is a lot of like, I used to just obsess over like polished outputs. Um, but the startup life, very opposite. Like it has taught me that like um done and tested like beats being perfect but late, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Hmm.
Um and I just say that because like that is the mindset I was going in with the startup was so like that's not what you need. You need to be comfortable with being imperfect, and being comfortable with being uncomfortable. um and that was very hard, so it's the whole perfectionism, and then also like having had some successes, I think you put a lot of personal pressure in yourself, right? Into like, look, I know how to run a business. I can do this. And I've always said, like, I can scale a business from one to two to three to four and feel fine about that, and confident. But the 0 to 1 journey, it is mathematically impossible. So you've got to have a little bit of like naivete and a little bit of like, doesn't have to be perfect. Um, and that's like a personal journey you have to go through too, outside of just like this professional thing, because I'm not going to be perfect right off the bat. I'm not going to get to, you know, eh, this certain level right away. But that's my expectation because I was working in that level for so long that that was like my objective.
Yeah. And I think also, and I'd love to hear your take on this, corporate life gives you such structure and consistency in terms of an income. And some people are born with the ability to not care about that, and they're risk takers and they just jump for it. And other people really lean into that. And I'm always interested to know about people who take the courageous leap as you did, who go from one to the other, right? Primarily from that structured, safe corporate life to that entrepreneurial journey, which is unstable and inconsistent when it comes to a lot of things. And to that point, how did you finance this operation? Was it capital intensive? Did you put a lot of money down?
Yeah, capital. It's always the question. I I go back to I think I was fortunate. So our company has been bootstrapped up till now still.
Amazing.
Um and I have had, the privilege, and I don't take that lightly at all, to be able to, start a company like this bootstrapped. And I recognize that as a huge privilege because there's a lot of people out there with innovative ideas that just like get really paused when it comes to like, how am I going to fund this, right? But to be completely honest with you, when I built this company, I wasn't thinking like unicorn status. I wasn't thinking like huge exits, right? I literally was just like, I wanted something on my own, not having to report to public stakeholders, but making a little bit of an impact, and feeling good about it. And really introducing this like new way of thinking. So yeah, yeah, everything is bootstrapped. But I do think that like as we're scaling, we're gonna need to really look into like other creative fundings to make the
Hmm.
impact that we want to.
Sure, sure. You're still relatively in the early stages. You created this like MVP, and you're putting it out there, and you're growing it, and you're publicizing your business, which is needed. But I want to double down on this because I think it's really important. What you're doing, what the business is fundamentally doing, is connecting jewelry from consumers to recycling plants of metal that then go into other industries like technology.
That's right.
Besides the basics of business, right? Like a website, a registration, things of this nature. What was the most capital intensive part of creating an enterprise that links the two?
Really, it's facility, and within that, it's like having employees to be managing it. So once we get the jewelry, we've got to sort it, test it, and really figuring out what the pathway is to extend the life of that jewelry. So that's really the biggest expense. Um, I mean, but if I'm being really honest, this is like the hardest I've ever worked for very, very little that I'm getting from a financial standpoint, right?
Sure.
Yeah. But
Right
that's kind of
now.
the yes, that's kind of
Right.
the name of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's fair enough, and that's good to know. Again, I want to paint this picture because, to your point, the reduce is basically like a flag bearer. It's a maverick. It's a pioneer in the space. It's connecting two worlds that aren't talking and doing it in a way that is innovative. There's a lot of take back programs in the world. There's a lot. The idea of transforming a consumer facing industry and more sustainable is heavily publicized. I'm looking at fashion right now. But jewelry is, an adjacent but very unique enterprise because it's metals, it's craftsmanship in a way that other product categories just aren't. And again, this sort of connection with technology and the importance of gold and silver in medical devices and the laptop that we're working off of our phones, et cetera, things that really matter. Whatever happens to reduce, you're creating a pathway for other enterprises to follow through and double down on that goal. And again, you're really, what I appreciate about Reduce is that you're really starting with a problem in mind and designing a solution around it, right? And I think that's really like kudos to you. Going back to the topic of finance though and funding this, I do have one question I always like to ask my guests is, when you're in that transition and you weren't from the corporate world to taking a sabbatical to starting a business, may I ask, what did you do for healthcare during that time? We both live in America. That's a
Yeah,
first thing we have
again,
to ask.
I say that I come from a position of privilege, right? Like I have a partner that is very supportive of me and my journey. So he's been kind of steady Eddie. In and I call him also my first investor. So yeah, I think that, as far as healthcare,
Hmm.
that's a huge risk, right?
Yeah.
Um, and having 3 kids, they're not cheap. They're not feeding themselves,
No.
right?
Young kids too, from my understanding, right?
Yeah. So,
That's a lot.
like, but I felt so compelled enough that this is something that needed to exist in the world. And you just, you mentioned like this movement, and I I get so like it's such a heavy weight when people mention me or our business or our model in a way that's like it's a maverick or a pioneer, and it's such a heavy weight of responsibility. When people are like you should feel good about that, and I'm like I do, but it's also like we've got to make sure that this works.
Mm,
But what I do find solace in that is that like we are like being the proof that change is possible. Like that is a really big motivator here for me and what we do. Um because it is like it's a big thing. I was just having coffee with my husband the other day and I was just like, what am I doing? Like why did I do something so crazy? Like why didn't I just make a coffee shop? Like you know where to source your coffee, you know how to hire, like I can build a coffee, like all of that has a playbook, I guess
Yeah.
is my point.
Yeah.
But I not only started a company, which uh, entrepreneurship is crazy on its own, but I literally built something in this white space, which is like 100 times crazier.
Hmm.
Um, but then on the other side of that, it's also like, but because there's no playbook, you have the opportunity to really like write it on your own too.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
there's a little bit of comfort in that, but it does feel a little bit like you are wacky.
You're not wacky. You're very smart and capable, and gonna go do big things. No pressure, but that's what's gonna happen.
Thank you.
Um, taking a step back though, I'm thinking about this larger industry, right, and the lack thereof, let's say, of your specific space. But generally speaking, what makes you what about jewelry? Um, gets or why do you think what Chloe? Why do you think that that jewelry gets overlooked in circularity discussions?
Ooh, well, I have theories. I'm open to hearing more.
Please.
Um, One of them is what I mentioned. I just feel like we've done such a great job in our industry to be so opaque with the marketing, right? Like the messaging is one, you don't like get rid of your jewelry, but people do. But also, we're creating literal garbage jewelry that we should not be keeping or wearing. But we're not talking about
Yes.
that.
Yes.
And so there's just that messaging. And I think jewelry has been around since the beginning of time almost, like, right? Like, there are jewelry that's thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. Um, and we've just been, I don't know, programmed that it's something you keep. There's emotional attachments to it. Um, and that's that. So I think there's those things that like really get in the way of what we think about the end of life of our jewelry, right? So that's one of the things that we truly wanted to address was in circulate with circularity of jewelry is like what happens when you have fallen out of love with that piece?
Hmm. Hmm.
And no one has been talking about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
What are some discoveries about the end of life of jewelry? I mean, I'm thinking about. I'll paint a picture and then please react. I have a box of silver, mostly rings, necklaces, and bracelets. I personally like to consume things that are only sentimental to me, so they come from trips and whatnot, special places. But there are things that I don't wear, and I go to thrift shops all the time, and I see these buckets of rings and whatnot. I go to flea markets, and there's all this jewelry and stuff. I know that not all that stuff is going to get bought. It goes somewhere. Where does it go? What happens? What happens to the things that we don't love anymore?
that's a good question. So up until now, um, women just really didn't address that idea, right? Of like, what do I do with my jewelry that I no longer want or need? And before I answer that question, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that like your jewelry is such like a tiny piece, right? Like you have a box and it's probably something you've like taken moved around with you in different places, different cities, because it literally is one of those things that's like out of sight out of mind, right? It's not like a sofa where you're
Yeah.
like, it is broken, it's taking up this huge space in my living room or in my garage. Before I can upgrade or get a new one or exchange it, I need to get rid of this one first, right? Your jewelry, you're literally like, it's in a bag somewhere in your drawer, and you just don't know what to do with it, but you're not going to address it because it's just not top of mind. Like it
Hmm.
literally is in that sofa in your face that you're like, I got to deal with it, right? Um, but in terms of like what people were doing prior to this, it goes back to the whole like creating something completely new in the white space. So it's not a new thing for jewelry company to be like, "Hey, we'll take back your jewelry and then we'll put it back into another new piece." Great. Love that idea that we're repurposing. And culturally, the rest of the world like this is a thing that they do
Hmm.
all around. Like I will go to like China and I have a jeweler. Like that is a common practice in some of these like countries, but we don't do that here, particularly in America. But up until now, literally it's like, okay, jewelry company had that. Um, but then there it wasn't anything else that's like, well, we're gonna do something beyond that. And so that was another opportunity for me. I was like, okay, we can do better, jewelry industry. We're doing such a great job in like pushing the sale. How about like trying to figure out like a fraction of how do we bring it back and figuring out something different that's not going to end up in landfills, right?
Hmm.
Um, but then me as a consumer of jewelry, I didn't have options when I didn't like it anymore. My options were landfilling it. Yes, people throw away their jewelry.
Crazy.
Um, yeah. The other is, donating it to like the goodwills of the world, right? Um, which is fine, but I think there's some like trust issues and people are just like, I don't really know what's happening with it. And then you can resell it, but that requires effort. Like there's a reason why that stuff is still in your box. You're not taking photos. You're not
Uh,
getting pricing, you're not doing the shipping, like that requires so much more effort, right? In the resale world. Um, or there's the pawn shop, but nobody is doing that. It's such an icky experience. It's predatory. And I know from my running a company and a jewelry company, the jewelry customer is not the pawn shop customer. Um, so also the only other option is really like keeping it, right? Or regifting it. So we literally carved a different solution there
hmm. Hmm.
that is connecting to a different industry.
So why do you target consumers specifically versus manufacturers and their offcuts or whatever? I feel like it's a very different. It would be a very different operation the other
Yeah,
way. But tell me more.
we do both. So we
Okay.
have a B2B partnership opportunity as well as direct to consumer standpoint. So
Feel free to not answer this, but is there a percentage breakdown between how much weight you get from one versus the other?
well, at least from a jewelry collection, the B2B is like the larger impact, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think from a customer awareness standpoint, it's definitely the consumer side, right? It's the education side.
Do you think I'm curious to know if you know, your operations is suitable for future expansion into, for example, like e-waste and being able to take back the precious metals within those devices.
I get asked that all the time, but I honestly say no, but I reserve the right to change my mind. No, I honestly feel like the jewelry industry is so untapped. Because of the pent-up demand that we've had for years, that even if we just focused in that, it would be enough. And I also feel, again, I love that people are solving the e-waste problem. We have so many problems in the world. Literally take your pick,
Yeah,
right? And
point you
just
anywhere.
yeah. And so the fact that we're like really focusing on that and solving on it, but if our focus is to recover precious metals from this e-waste, I really feel like we're barking off of the wrong tree. Because it takes what, like 100 cell phones to get the same amount of gold that you can get from a 14K ring, like band. And imagine the byproduct, the waste, the toxicity
Yeah. Yeah.
that has to come from just processing
Mhm.
um, these
Mhm.
materials, because when they were designed, no one was thinking about how to design this properly so we could address the end of life in a clean way.
Mhm. No,
So,
makes total sense. I get that, and when I hear about e-waste, unfortunately, fortunately, I have such connotations of like a horrible landfill and it's the global south, and it's polluting the waterways and all that stuff, and just all net negative. Um, I do have a separate question that I'd love to know your take on. Obviously you have a specific problem that you're trying to address, and that in and of itself is worthy of your pursuit. But as a circularity business, as a company focused on sustainability, how do you account for the impact of the logistics of shipping realistically? A little package with a couple rings in it is this small, but it's going from New York to California, from Texas to Florida, whatever. How do you does that what's your take on that?
look, we can't all be perfect, right? I mean, honestly, yeah, like, I love Greta Thunberg. I am not her. I could aspire to be her, but I also love to travel, but I'm not going on a container ship to get to my speaking engagements. You know what I mean? It's just,
No, I get you. I get you. No, I totally.
but from an environmental impact standpoint, recycled gold or silver generates 600 to 800 times less carbon emissions than gold extracted from ore. So, with just that information, I feel like I have a little bit of wiggle room to get shit in the right places, right? Did that answer it?
Perfectly, actually. Very clear. And to that point, I'm just curious, a little bit jumping back to your business model. You take jewelry from consumers, and you also take jewelry from manufacturers, and you make sure that that goes into the right recycling channel to then get put into other technology and other devices. How do you is a part of your business the sale of those metals to recyclers or to final manufacturers?
Yeah, so I mean, the dream would be to have our own facility to be
Hmm.
refining and all of that. But as you mentioned, we're like early on. So we actually partner with people that are actually processing that, and um, they're basically the ones in charge of selling the materials to these innovators, right? These technologists that is making it the materials. I We do have it contracted in that we want to make sure that it's going into people or businesses that want green um, resources, right? Because not everybody is really tied to that. It's like, but at the end of the day, you're going to run out of stuff. So people are just going to be like, they'll take what they can get at this point. But the fact that we're literally like a closed loop recycling facility, you know, we're able to not only give you something that is clean and green and less harmful, um, we're also like a good domestic resource, because currently most of our precious metals are being, imported.
Do your partners, are they mostly US based, or are they abroad? And
Yeah, we're US based for now. Um, yeah, I'm sure if you're in the sustainability world, you've heard focuses on like, how do we secure we have rare earths or rare metals that are domestic? And it's like, that's great. Again, back to, we need to be solving a lot of problems, and I'm happy that we're figuring out where lithium is coming from, and if we have enough. But I'm always like, that's great, but you can make all of this stuff for batteries, but you're going to need our silver and gold to really turn everything on. So what are we doing about that?
hmm hmm no, and it's again, it's a worthwhile problem to focus on and double down on that specifically. I'm curious to know how recycling economics plays an impact on your business, though, because from my understanding, in the recycling business, prices go up and down given supply and demand compared to virgin's feedstock, and that feels like it would directly impact you. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Um, it's a really good question because I always get asked like, well, how are you like monetizing or um what is your business model, right? So I go back to like my counterparts in the textile world. Um which I love the innovation that's happening all around, right? Whether it's from resale, upcycle, downcycle, breaking down the materials, all of that, like some very phenomenal work that's being done. I think it's so difficult to make a business case for I mean, not to me, but like to investors out there in the world to be like, there's a business case here, because there's so much like investment that needs to be done in those type of works, right? Um, but for jewelry, when we're talking about precious metals, we're essentially a commodity. We're tied to what is like literally traded in the market right now. So
Mm,
I didn't check what gold is, but today, but the other day it was like $4,200 an ounce. So very different. Like there's no textile commodity pricing.
mm,
So it's hard to make that business case on like how you can kind of make the math work on what that recycling is. And also from like a recycling percentage, the textile world, like I think we're happy if we can say we've been able to recycle 15 to like 20% of these garments, right?
that would be awesome if that happened.
Right. But with our numbers, just within Reduce, everything that we have collected, we have been able to recycle or reuse or repurpose up to 95% of what we've got. And the reason is because we truly are like committed to that circularity model, right? So
Hmm.
even if it doesn't have precious metals, if it still has life, we have partners that are nonprofits that we will
Yeah.
donate it to where they can reuse it or they can resell it to fund their nonprofit. If it's a broken chain of like beads, like, yeah, it should not be going in landfills, but we give it to local art programs where they don't have to invest in buying raw materials, right? So I think it's just like figuring out pathways that could extend the life that has been like also very beneficial with our business model too.
Hmm. Hmm. Cleo, what is giving you hope in the circularity space, broadly speaking?
Oh my gosh. Like I said, I think there is so much innovation that's happening, not just in the fashion world. Um, I think that we're now looking at different industries, which I find really fascinating too. You mentioned the food and agro world. Like I think there's some interesting things happening there. So I think that different industries are doing some really great stuff. So I'm really hopeful about that. Um, I'm hopeful that, you know, people are actually interested in learning about what I'm doing within the jewelry space. Um, which that was very accidental. Like I did not this whole like taking this show on the road thing was not part of the plan, but it just has happened that way. And I feel like, you know, if I just change one person's mind about really understanding where the joy comes from, like that's enough for them to tell another person. Um, but yeah, so I think it's hopeful. I think people are curious about different solutions, which I think is a good start. So
Hmm. To that point, do you have any advice for an aspiring founder who wants to address the sustainability problem from the perspective of circularity?
yeah, it's I think that like I go back to there's so many problems, right? Like just pick one and it doesn't have to be perfect, right? I mean, where would we be if everyone picked one problem, had 20% of the solution for that one problem? If everyone did that, we would be in so much better space, right? And so I think you don't have to be perfect. Just do it. And then like don't worry about whether or not someone is already doing it or doing it better. Right? I think that's one of the biggest things too. It's like, well, I can't start a company, like that's already being done. Or like they're already doing it. Like it's being solved. um you have a unique perspective. You probably have a unique experience. You will have a different solution. So it's worth exploring.
I love it. I love it. No, that's great advice. Cleo, I want to appreciate you again for your time today. And, most importantly, what you're doing is really inspiring to many and needed in this world. And I just love whenever I see entrepreneurs addressing problems from a cross-industry perspective. I think those types of solutions are needed. And there's so many opportunities to address waste in one industry to solve a problem in another, and I think that Redyoos is such a perfect example of that. So I really only wish you success, and I'm excited to see where Redyoos goes in the future.
Thank you so much.